Welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's, a weekly podcast from St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Orlando that invites you to go deeper with Scripture, to learn God's story, so that together we can live, love, and lead a life following Jesus to awaken disciples and reveal the kingdom. This week on Your Week with St. Luke's, we are joined by one of our favorite friends, Dr. Ryan Bonfigllio from the Candler School of Theology Foundry. He is going to be guiding us over the next 4 weeks in our series, Resolute in Our Purpose. We'll be exploring the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament book of Daniel. Yes, that Daniel, lion's den, fiery furnace. And we're going to be covering the whole book over our time together over these next 4 weeks. But we're going to be jumping to start a little bit later in the book, primarily focused first in chapter 3. And this week we ask the question, what do we value? At the beginning of Daniel, in chapter 1, we actually meet a few folks in addition to Daniel, and they're all given new names, the names that we know them best by, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All of them, with Daniel, are put to the test about where their allegiance lies, with God or with the king. And we're going to start with the story that we know best about the three of them, which occurs in chapter 3 of the book of Daniel. So let's jump in with Dr. Bonfigllio now as we begin our journey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Bonfigllio, and I'm an associate professor in the practice of Old Testament here at Emory's Candler School of Theology. Today, we'll begin a 4-session exploration of the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel. You at St. Luke's will be doing a sermon series on these very same texts during the month of September. The lessons that follow are designed to help you get the most out of your worship experience by taking a closer look at Daniel's historical context, key themes, and most important theological takeaways. So, let's get started.
Few parts of the book of Daniel have captured the imagination of readers more than the story of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and their ordeal with the king's fiery furnace. In fact, in 1930, the famous African-American composer Robert McGimsey wrote a spiritual based on the events of this story. It was first performed by Louis Armstrong and was later recorded by the likes of Brooke Benton, the Ames brothers, Benny Goodman, and Sonny Rollins. Here's a taste of Louis Armstrong's version.
Was 3 children from the land of Israel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, took a trip to the land of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, took a lot of gold and made an idol. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and he told everybody we'd hear the music of the trumpet. And he told everybody we'd hear the music of the flute. And he told everybody we'd hear the music of the horn. They must fall down and worship the idol Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. But the children of Israel would not bow down. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. So the king put the children in a fiery furnace, steeped on coals and red hot brimstone, 7 times hotter, hotter than it ought to be. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, you couldn't burn a hair on the head of Shadrach, laughing and talking while the fire jumping round. Nebuchadnezzar called, hey there, and he saw the power of the Lord. And they had a big time in the house of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Abednego.
Now let's unpack these lyrics you just heard a bit more. As Daniel 3 begins, we learn that King Nebuchadnezzar has made a colossal golden statue. We don't know whether the statue is supposed to represent the king himself or maybe one of the Babylonian gods. It could be either, and in fact, in the ancient world, there was often only a very fine line between the image of the king and the image of his favorite deity. We soon learned that the king has made a decree that people of all nations and cultures are to bow down and worship the statue when the king's band is heard playing. Whoever does not do so will be thrown into a fiery furnace where they'll meet a grisly death. Now, this is not the first time that we have seen Nebuchadnezzar making ominous threats. Remember back in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar wanted to destroy all of his dream interpreters because they could not reveal to him the content of his dream. This portrayal of Nebuchadnezzar as a power-crazed ruler would have resonated with the original reader of the book of Daniel. At the time the book of Daniel was written, somewhere in the 2nd century BCE, Israel was terrorized by a vicious king named Antiochus IV. He was a Ptolemaic ruler who made every effort to destroy the Jews. He outlawed their customs. He set up a statue of Zeus in the Jewish temple, and he even went so far as to sacrifice a pig on the Jewish altar. This latter act was so heinous that in the book of Daniel, it is referred to as the abomination that causes desolation. The point here is that the original readers would have made a connection between this terrifying description of Nebuchadnezzar and the king that they knew and who ruled over them. Now, as the story continues, we soon learn that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down and worship the golden statue. To do so would be to deny their faith and practice what the Bible calls idolatry. The king, predictably, flies into a rage and orders the furnace to be heated to 7 times its normal temperature. He has the 3 friends bound and thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, when the furnace is reopened, the craziest thing happens. The 3 men appear completely unharmed. The text gives us this wonderful detail. In verse 27, it says that neither their hair nor their clothes were singed, and what's more, they didn't even smell like smoke when they emerge. Now, trust me, if you've ever spent 5 minutes at a campfire, you'll know that coming away not smelling like smoke would be a miracle unto itself. Now, from here, the story works its way to a rapid conclusion. Just like in chapter 2, the king is astonished by what happened, and he ends up blessing the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But now he goes a step further. He issues a decree that says that anyone who utters blasphemy against the God of Israel should themselves immediately be put to death. This represents an ironic reversal of the original decree. At the beginning of the story, the king is willing to kill those who don't worship the statue, and now at the end, he is willing to kill those who threaten the people who don't worship the statue. That's the basic contour of Daniel chapter 3. Now, let's go back and look a bit more closely at a few important details and questions. First, you might be wondering, where is Daniel in all of this? Strangely, the lead character of the book as a whole is not mentioned at all in chapter 3. Why? Well, the ancient rabbis had an interesting idea. In an ancient commentary on scripture known as the Talmud, the rabbis suggest that all of this was playing out while Daniel just so happened to be on a trip out of the country. He must have had some serious FOMO going on. I think a more likely possibility is that this story of the fiery furnace once existed independently of the rest of the book of Daniel. That is, it was its own separate tale of 3 young Israelite men who defy an order of the king and are rescued from a dangerous circumstance. It was only later that this story was added to the stories in Daniel 1, 2, 3, or 2, 4, 5, and 6. What connects the fiery furnace story to the stories about Daniel is that it too explores what it means to live by faith in the court of a foreign king. In fact, it might even be the case that Daniel 6 is fashioned after the story of Daniel 3. In chapter 6, it is Daniel who is the center of attention, and it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who are left off stage. Much like the 3 friends in chapter 3, Daniel in chapter 6 defies an edict of the king, is sentenced to death, albeit by a lion's den and not a fiery furnace, and ultimately God delivers him from the danger. You might then think of chapters 3 and 6 as being mirror images of one another, with chapter 3 being focused on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and chapter 6 being focused on Daniel. Now, second, there is one element of the story that I left out earlier and want to circle back to, and it's quite odd. Just before the king opens the furnace door and the three men emerge unharmed, the king looks in and he sees a fourth figure among them who is said to have the appearance of a god. Now, who is this fourth figure? The original readers of Daniel would have understood the figure to be an angel representing God's protective presence. And this is actually how the king understands things. In verse 28, he says, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel," meaning this fourth figure, "and delivered his servants who trusted in him." Years later, when early Christians read this story, they had a different idea. They interpreted this fourth figure as the pre-incarnate Jesus. What led them to this interpretation was likely that the story of the three men surviving the deadly furnace reminded them of the story of Jesus, emerging alive from the grave on Easter morning. Of course, the parallel is not exact. Jesus actually dies and then is resurrected, while these three men are never harmed. Nevertheless, this interpretation has had remarkable staying power in Christian circles. Do a Google search on Daniel chapter 3, and I promise you that you'll find hundreds of Christian interpreters today who claim that this fourth person is, in fact, Jesus. While we can't rule out this interpretation, we must underscore that the text itself does not make this connection explicitly. Now, finally, I want to ask, when it comes to Daniel 3, what type of literature are we reading? The best answer is that it is an ancient religious genre known as a martyr legend. Now, a martyr legend is a story in which the integrity of an individual's faith is put to the test, often by an evil ruler or some other type of antagonist. And in the midst of this test, the person is willing to undergo suffering and even death rather than deny their faith or worship a foreign god. In the Jewish tradition, martyr legends go all the way back to the 2nd century BC. It's then that we begin to see martyr stories pop up in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, books that we don't find in our Christian canon, but preserve important moments in Jewish history, including the origins of Hanukkah. In Christianity, the earliest followers of Jesus faced significant persecution by the Roman Empire, especially by Emperor Nero, who boasted of crucifying countless Christians for their faith. The early church collected these stories of these martyrs, and they even incorporated them into church liturgies in an effort to inspire others on to faithfulness. When it comes to stories of martyrs, what matters most is not what happens to the individual at the end, but rather their attitude along the way. This is evident in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Listen to how they respond to the king when he threatens them with the fiery furnace. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your God, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Notice that these three friends are not sure if God in the end will save them from their situation. Their faithfulness is not contingent on being delivered. They're willing to stand for what they believe regardless of the cost and the outcome. Commenting on this passage, the great early church thinker, St. Augustine, remarks that, quote, "This statement of loyalty, even in the face of death, already is a victory over the oppressor." The oppressor, Augustine continues, can take your money, he can take your land and your body, all without your consent, but he cannot take your faith. There's one final point I want to add here. On the surface of things, Daniel 3 could be read as saying that as long as you are faithful and trust in God, everything will work out in the end, much like it did for the three friends who were delivered from the fiery furnace. But we need to be cautious about concluding that this text affirms that if we trust in God, we will always be delivered. We know that God is trustworthy, but at the same time, it doesn't follow that faithful people are always delivered out of danger. There were Jews at Auschwitz who refused to eat non-kosher food, and they still died in the gas chamber. Christians, too, have been faithful in the midst of persecution in various parts of the world, and they still suffered and died. Many of us know incredibly faithful people who are not delivered from early onset dementia or terminal cancer or painful divorce. I think what Daniel 3 offers us is something that is more nuanced than the promise that everything will work out in the end for those who believe. The point of the story is not about divine deliverance as much as it is about divine presence. Here's where that fourth figure in the fiery furnace is important. When the three go into the furnace, God, in the form of the figure, goes with them. They don't go alone into their suffering or their danger. God is not waiting for them on the other side of the fiery furnace. God accompanies them into the fire of the furnace. And this is a remarkable thing, and it's a point of emphasis throughout all of Scripture. In the Old Testament, one of the names for God is Emmanuel, which in Hebrew means God with us. This name is God's deepest promise to each of us. Even in the face of suffering or pain or grief or trauma, God is with us. God journeys with us into the hardest moments. We are not abandoned. We are not alone. This is why, in the opening chapter of the book of Matthew, as the angel announces the coming birth of Jesus, the angel tells Joseph to call his name Emmanuel. Jesus, the Word made flesh, is the fullest embodiment of the divine promise of presence. In Jesus, we are not promised success or fame nor freedom from suffering. But in Jesus, we are promised that the God of grace, who overflows in mercy, will be with us now and always to the very end of the age. Thanks be to God.